Welcome to Mindrolling, and I'm one of your hosts, Raghu Marcus.
And I'm the other, David Silver, and I welcome you also.
We're going to talk this week about something very dear to both of us. We've worked together, I think we've mentioned this in previous podcasts, in the music area over many years, and David has been closely associated with some fabulous projects, which I'm going to have you mention a couple of them. And but here is our theme of this particular podcast, which is all about music as a transformational ally. We talked, I think, David, before I talked about my initial experience. The world was so oppressive, and it was only till Dylan came along that he could voice that oppression. And boy, that saved me, at 16 years, 17 years old, or whatever it was. And then I think I also talked about John Coltrane being at one of his concerts and for the first time having an out-of-body kind of an experience. I mean, an experience that I had no idea what I was going through. So speak to that a little bit, Dave.
Well, I think many people listening hopefully have had parallel experiences if they're of our age, and different kinds of process of listening to music and being transformed by it if they're not of our age. I also was woken up by music, by jazz. And my brother, who was 10 years older than me, turned me on to bebop music, Charlie Parker, Miles Davis, Jerry Mulligan, in the late 50s when I was still very young. And also for me, Coltrane, because he took that music and just expanded it and made it infinitely more flexible and exploratory. I saw him live with Eric Dolphy and McCoy Tyner and Elvin Jones at the Brighton Dome in Sussex in England, where I grew up. And my brother made sure that we were in the front row because he was fanatical about Coltrane, and I didn't really quite understand that at the age of 12. And after that concert, I was a changed lad. Because Coltrane was just, it's impossible to describe the live experience except by listening to the records. He just took that bebop freedom and made another level, took it to another level of incredible invention.
Well, he was such a spiritual character. I mean, obviously, and his expression was so connected internally. I mean, he was searching for something, and he was able to express that search, that internal search, in ways, of course, that very, very few artists, have done in the past. And if we're going to bring in artists of this nature, I would have to also include Ali Akbar Khan, the great Indian maestro who, at one point, Yehudi Menuhin called the greatest living musician in the world. He died only a couple of years ago. Now, these may be a little bit of new names to some people and artists that, in terms of Ali Akbar Khan, people may not have heard, and we highly would both of us recommend. I ended up working with him in the record label that both David and I worked on together, Triloka Records, and I would say that was the pinnacle of any kind of experience I had working with somebody like this, who was a pure genius, and certainly the emblem for what we are talking about, which is what are the allies in terms of music? Yeah. What are those allies? How do they work upon us to allow that transformation to take place?
It's a very wide definition because you can go all the way from pure entertainment. Because I remember when I was very young, my older sister and older brother and father and mother all listened to Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. And I loved it. I thought it was liberating actually at that time because it was American and I was living in England, which didn't have, any musicians of that caliber at the time. And we never thought it would have. So in the late 50s, that was a major part of my education and my also feeling that life was more than just, the routine, the 50s routine. And it wasn't until the mid-'60s, I think, that turned into something much bigger and much more internalized, despite the enormous popularity of the 60s music. I found it to be an inner experience, and that was my first real chance of using music, and it using me, as you called it, Raghu, an ally. I was just reading an interview with Bob Dylan in Rolling Stone, and he said something funny. He said that the old and the new come together in a magical way. You don't know when the old ends and when the new begins, but his definition was the 50s went on until about 1964 65, and he said that's when the 60s started. Mm-hmm. And coming from him, I think that's sort of gospel, because even though Dylan is a bit of a curmudgeon and denies that he had anything to do with what people think of as the 60s, for the rest of us who weren't Bob Dylan, he had everything to do with it. And for me, he was the first. To call him a pop star is really wrong. He became enormously popular. But one time, many years ago, I talked to his brother, David Zimmerman. Mm-hmm. And really? I had a little friendship with David. And he told me, to my surprise, that Dylan did not sell records in the 60s, that it was paltry, the number of records he sold. If he sold 100,000, he was thrilled. That people weren't buying Dylan in huge amounts, because it took a long time before the pop buying public accepted him as an entertainer, if you like, when he started playing electric music. When he started playing electric music, I was just totally enthralled and felt that there was something out there that millions of other people were aware of that corresponded to a feeling inside my heart and my mind, which was a mixture of rebellion, liberation, confusion, chaos, and order. Strange mix, strange cocktail. But so that was Dylan. And that was probably mine, and I think maybe yours too, Raghu, the first sort of at least pop person who had that effect, who wasn't just, an entertainer that made you laugh and then you felt slightly better and you went home and listened to a record. Yeah. No.
Or just a melody that just bounced around in your head, a pop melody. No, he certainly was the perfect intersection between culture and something inside that aspired to jump out of us, to become something different than what it was that we were being preached to by the culture. So he certainly was. And I have to, you need to talk about, the other, what I would call emblem of what it is that we're talking about, that he embodied the combination of what was going on in the culture, but had such a spiritual effect on people, Bob Marley. And David, you've got, of course, we must hear, David worked with Bob over several years or more. I'm not even sure, but spent a lot of time with Bob. Tell us a little bit about Bob.
It was 4 years. I first met Bob in December of 1975, I guess, and was with him the night or the day before he collapsed in Central Park. When he came to New York, he always used to take a run a certain part of Central Park, and the one he did the day after I videotaped him in 1980, I think it was August 1980, was the day he collapsed. So I think I'm right in saying that me and my crew, a team of videographers, were the last people to shoot Bob Marley. And it's interesting because he was very sprightly and alive and seemed incredibly healthy on that day and did a lot of songs for us. But I first met him because I got involved in reggae music. I was a filmmaker and was fascinated by reggae music. And like most people who got into it, it was because of the film Harder They Come with Jimmy Cliff, which came out in mid-'70s. And became so infatuated with the form because it wasn't just incredible dance music and everything and lively, beautiful, amazing music. It was also deeply spiritual because the true Rastafarian ethos behind reggae music was based upon very devotional behavior. In fact, reggae music comes from a thing called a groundation. The groundation was a very religious ritual where drums were played, mainly drums, and people sang. And out of that sprung the true reggae music of the mid-'70s. I then got the money together to shoot Peter Tosh at the Beacon Theatre in New York. Peter Tosh was one of the Wailers.
Yeah.
The original Wailers were Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, and Bunny Wailer. And we did it. And it was maybe the first multi-camera shoot of a reggae concert. And it was delightful, and I became very friendly with Peter. But very soon after that, Don Taylor, who was Marley's manager, called me and said, "Man, what you shooting Peter for, man? You should shoot Bob, Bob and the Tommy the Gong man." And I later learned that meant he was kind of the king. Now, Bob never thought of himself as a king or a star or anything. He only saw himself as a messenger of Jah. And I met him, I tried to work this out, but probably between 20 and 30 times. Videotaped him at least 10 times.
Well, I have to jump on this because I have seen this footage. Not a lot of people have seen this footage. David did some footage of him in a hotel room one day where he played, what was the song he played?
He did Coming In From the Cold and Redemption Song,
which is one of the most incredible spiritual songs one has ever heard. And he did it over and over and over. I'll never forget. And every time he did it, it went into another level of journeying inside. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. Just tell us about that moment. What did that feel like, being in the room with that vibration?
Well, people have said this before, but, when you're doing a job, you're doing a job. And it's a job, and you don't get too, blown away by it, or you can't do it. I'd worked with Bob a lot by that time, so I knew him and the Wailers. But that was just him alone. We got to the Essex House Hotel, which is on Centre Park South, a very nice hotel, where he tended to stay. And I walked in the room with my crew, and there were about 15 or 20 Rastas in there who were close friends of Bob, and I knew them. And the atmosphere was incredibly friendly and warm. And they cooked some Ital food, which is vegetarian Jamaican food for us, which we ate, and we're honored to eat. And then I said to Bob, "What do you want to sing?" And he said, "Well, what do you want us to sing?" And I said, "Well, Redemption Song." And he said, "Give me another one." And my camera operator, Freddie, said, "Coming In From the Cold is my favorite song of yours." So he did those two. He did Coming In From the Cold 11 times, and Redemption Song actually 10 times. And as Raghu put it, it was better every time. Funny thing was that after each one, he would turn to me and say, "So, what do you think?" I said, "Great." You know what I'm going to say to Bob Marley? It was mediocre. I did think that it was great. And he'd look at me and smile and say, "Can be better." And so we did that 10 times. And it was just he didn't have a guitar even. I sent someone out and we
There was a Nashville Steel.
No, it was an Epiphone. And it was an acoustic Epiphone, a rather cheap one. And we rented it from a local guitar store.
Oh, really?
And they didn't want to do it. But when I said to them, "Well, it's for Bob Marley," he didn't believe me at first. And then we called Bob. So we got it and we brought it in and he did it. He was a master because he could just play that thing like like Segovia. He was just an amazing guitar player.
It was riveting.
Wonderful stuff. Yeah. Now, before that, I'd spent a lot of time in Jamaica with Bob. And we can get into that a little later. I don't want to talk about this too much at this point because there's much, there's 3 podcasts about this. But getting used to him was the key to working with him. Because he wasn't, a touchy-feely kind of man. He was a lovely, warm, gentle soul. But I remember my friend Earl Chin, who was the first...
He was so gentle. That's when he went to the radio station when they wouldn't play his song with a gun and pointed at the guy and said, "Play this song."
He had that side.
Yeah.
He had that side. But he didn't exhibit it with us because we were the first people at that time to spend our own money on shooting him. He was very grateful for that. We thought it was a great honor. But he was very sweet, when we were with him. But one time my friend Earl, who was a disc jockey, a very good one, reggae disc jockey, from Portland County in Jamaica, was interviewing him and on our show. We did a weekly reggae show at that time on New York television. And Earl made the mistake of saying to him, "Bob, you were just playing with Stevie Wonder and Mick Jagger was backstage coming to see you. What's it feel like to be a world superstar?" And Bob actually got irritated and said, "No, man, not a superstar, man, just a messenger." And he meant it. It sort of reminded me of His Holiness the Dalai Lama when people ask him questions like that. He says, I'm just a humble monk.
Yeah.
And that's what Bob was like. He was very humble in that way.
Yeah, and this points out that these people like this. I mean, I'm put aside His Holiness because that's a whole other realm and a whole other podcast, basically. But people like Marley, they knew that they had a place in the culture that was strictly as a messenger. And they were going to this was going to flow through them, and they were not attached to it. So their egos were way less involved, which is why what they did was transformative for people. You know, I'll tell you one funny story about Bob. Now, I never met him, unfortunately, because I worked in radio. I did meet a lot of people, but not him. And but one day he was playing a concert. I don't know if you'll remember this story, Dave. He was playing a concert in New York. It was the late 70s, or maybe 76, 7 or something, at Madison Square Garden. And so we decided to go down there. Now, we happened to be at the time in a spiritual scene, and I had not smoked pot, maybe it must have been a couple of years, a few years. Probably the longest run I've had not smoking pot, probably. But so we decided it's Bob Marley. You can't go to the garden, and you know. So actually, my wife at the time said she would drive. She'd be the designated driver. And I said, all right, well, here I happen to have some really good Thai bud at the time, Thai sticks, if you remember Thai sticks.
Oh, God.
So I said, make some brownies because we're not going to be sitting there smoking this stuff. So she did. Unfortunately, you're just supposed to use the shake when you make this stuff, or not the buds. It's like way too strong. So we're all in the car. We hadn't done it before. And the brownies were really good. So we all had like a couple of brownies apiece. We're talking about, we were in a van with about 8 people sitting in a row at the garden. By the time Marley, there was an act in front of him. I can't remember.
Commodores.
No. It was this guy who played the bass like with his fingers. He would finger pick the...
Stanley Clarke.
Stanley Clarke.
Yeah.
You're good. Yeah. So there we were after Stanley. Stanley went and sat down backstage, and Bob came on with with those incredibly beautiful, what do they call them? The
I3.
I3, yeah. And his band. And I heard later that he was smoking the same stuff. They had about a pound of it that they had backstage. Well, I'll tell you, this whole row of people was like we were on acid. You know, my friend next to me, and you'd have to stand up because, you couldn't see or anything. And he looked at me and he said, when do you think this will be over? It was like, on a terrible, other people were throwing up. I mean, it was an insane scene. But at one point, and Marley was singing, "Is this love? Is this love? Is this love?" And the penetration of him being he was the message. I mean, he entered into people's hearts in that, and there was 20,000 people in the garden. They all became one through him. I mean, that kind of magic. Where is that magic today, by the way? I mean, Springsteen obviously can create that. He brings people into that heart place, but is there a disconnect between what we experience with some of these incredible artists that we've talked about and, where that art is now? Is there still a transmittal? Are there still messengers? What do you think?
Well, I think nowadays the liveliest popular music has got to be rap music in terms of its massiveness.
You would include hip-hop, obviously.
Yeah, right. But I mean, it's global, as is reggae still. Last time I was in India, I was astonished at the number of images of Bob Marley in Delhi on T-shirts, posters,
yes.
everywhere.
Yeah.
But certainly, hip-hop music has taken over the planet, and it's been adapted in India, in Africa, in Asia, by Native Americans, by Brazilians. You can't see a movie these days that's made in a foreign country without hearing some version of rap. So I think that has social significance.
Right.
Whether it has deeply spiritual resonance, it's hard for me to discern. And I don't want to, the last thing you want to be is that old fogey who you fought
Yeah,
against
right.
in 1966,
Yeah, right, exactly
who said
that,
the
yeah.
Beatles were rubbish.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to be that person. But I, for one, I'm very open to music. I mean, I went to a Lady Gaga concert last year, and because there was some talk of working with her, so they gave me front row seats to her. And
Really?
At the Garden. And I have to say this, that I'd only seen her once before when she played solo piano at Carnegie Hall with Bono and The Edge.
Really?
And yeah, it was a Hal Wilner concert. It was a benefit. And I went and Bono did not say who was going to be there. And there were many people like Wayne Wright and great people were playing. And then he said at the end, and we have a special guest, and you'll know her. And she came on, and I was just astonished. She played solo piano, and she sang like Aretha Franklin.
Really?
She was amazing. She's an amazing, soulful singer. But when I saw her at the Garden, there were projections 100 feet high and 13-year-old girls screaming through the entire thing. And it just felt to me like some kind of cult. She calls them her monsters, her little monsters. It was hard for me to get into it because there was so much dancing going on the stage. There's sort of 50 guys dancing in leather suits.
Yeah, it's a big spectacle.
And it wasn't for me. It wasn't my cup of tea at all. She's a great singer. At the risk of alienating anybody under 22, I do not see much going on. The last time in rap music that I remember things of this nature was definitely Tupac and Biggie. They did a number of works together and separately, which were incredibly powerful. And, I don't know whether that is being reproduced now because most of the major rap and hip-hop stars have become magnates like Jay-Z and everything. And so, but I do pay homage to that. In the world of pop music, it seems to have gone back to pop.
Yeah, right.
To pure
rock and
pop.
roll. Yeah, rock and roll is not there anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you see Green Day, and they do a great show, and they're very powerful, and they're definitely a great rock and roll band. But are they Zeppelin? Are they, the Beatles, the Stones, the Dead? No. I mean, I would say that unreservedly, without, putting down Billy Joe Armstrong or anything. He's a fantastic performer. It's something to do with the zeitgeist of the 60s and 70s, Arago. I mean, there was something going on there that was so dimensional, involving the war, involving protest, involving psychedelic drugs, that made music be part of it, a real family part of it. It was like the elder son of the whole movement, Yeah. I don't think that we'll see anything quite like that again.
Well, one thing that took place that you and I were involved with, and we've mentioned the world music label Triloka that we were very much a part of, and we were led into world music because, I mean, for me, I kind of, what you're saying right now about, not feeling it from, I mean, certainly Springsteen, you would have to say. I mean, to this day, you go to one of his concerts and you get into that heart space. Bono can do it as well. So there still is something of that nature, but these guys are from 70s or late 70s, so they're a bit of, throwbacks to that generation. But we were looking for, and I personally was led to this by Ali Akbar Khan and Music of the East. And then basically we got into this label. It was sort of, there was so much of this pablum-ish kind of new age music going on at the time that it was just awful. And we wanted an antidote to that. And that antidote was discovering incredible music from around the world that had that transformational quality that could become immediately an ally to it. And our wonderful engineer here, Bruce, is going to help us out here, and we're going to play a little bit of this track, which was one of the original tracks that we got going with Triloka.
seja kufamba usiku loko tripele kashi ya kimuti makwero Ndrilele seja kufamba usiku loko tripele kashi ya kimuti makwero Yo Maria Antonia me utate kwa mani makwero Yo Maria Antonia me utate kwa mani makwero Shike wako konta mabara loko tripele utate kwa mani ngulwana Ndrilele si wako konta mabara loko tripele utate kwa mani ngulwana Yo Maria Antonia me utate kwa mani ngulwana Yeah 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 Yo Maria Antonia me utate kwa mani ngulwana
So this is a wonderful piece of music from a band called Orquestra Marabenta de Moçambique, from Mozambique. And this lead singer, whose name I don't recall, unfortunately, right now. This collection was on Triloka Records called Transplanet, which was a precursor to the famous Buddha Bar series that came out some years later. But unfortunately, this lead singer, he did die soon after this, yeah. So we lost somebody who was really great. So this is a good example of the kind of music that, even without understanding the words, that that what it is seeps inside your bones, you know, and it's a circular. I think one of the greatest adjectives you could use for what this ally is a circular feeling that becomes very trance-like and puts you into a one-pointed place where your discursive thought gets eliminated. And music is such a powerful thing. Now, in a future one of these podcasts, because we start talking about chant, which we eventually got into as well with Triloka, and that's a whole other subject that we could spend more than one podcast on.
I should add here, because if you look at these Triloka records, most of them, if not all of them, were executive produced by Mr. Mitchell Marcus, who's Raghu, and Mr. K.D. Kagel, who is Krishna Das. And these two gentlemen simply, sort of looked at the whole world for music. There were no, preconceptions. African, Indian, Pakistani, Native American, and also, special versions of indigenous music, by Jim Wilson, those kind of people. So that the label, and we don't want to get too self-indulgent here because we're both involved in it, was part of a movement. Peter Gabriel's Real World label was part of it. David Byrne's Luaka Pop was part of it. And everybody who was involved in it was entranced by how much fantastic music there was in places that we sometimes hadn't even heard of and certainly hadn't gone to. And what you just said was sort of put it all together, that it was music, it was entertaining. These were remarkable performers when you saw them, incredibly professional, incredibly technically adept. But there was something different going on from Western pop music. And it was about that one-pointedness, that taking you to a place of stillness in yourself. Yeah. No matter how energetic the music was, somehow or other, it made you still. and therefore was what you said at the beginning of this podcast, was an ally.
Yeah, and I like that word because that's definitely what this music can be for people, and we should we'll put it up on the website. I think we'll put a bunch of tracks up there on mindrollingpodcast.com, and everybody can take a look and try out some of this music and really see its power. I think it's time now. We have forgotten something extraordinarily important. We have a sponsor.
Yes.
And we got to talk about that.
We have a great one.
Yeah.
Audible.com, the primo audiobook company on the planet, I think. And they are our sponsor. And we should tell you that if you take their 30-day free trial, you get a free book. I did it. And I got a book that I loved. And then I got infected and addicted and started to get tons of stuff from them. The quality is very high. They're a great company. If you go to mindrollingpodcast.com, you can link up.
You'll see the link.
You'll see the link. And please do that because they very kindly are sponsoring us. Follow the prompts on that website and you'll learn a lot more about audible.com.
Now, David and I were talking about since we had this particular podcast, which was about transformative power of music, we thought, what are any books out there that have something a little bit different than just reading a bio of a musician or a history of music or so on and so forth? And we've come up with a couple of books. Dave's more familiar with them, so I'm going to let him talk about them.
Yeah, and they're both available on audible.com. Well, the first one is Chronicles by none other than Bob Dylan, and it's a delight to read, but Sean Penn's reading of the book is, if anything, even more enthralling. Sean Penn, as you all know, is a terrific actor and has done many different roles, but this one, he doesn't play Bob Dylan. He doesn't do that. But his tone, his attitude really sounds right all the way through, and I enjoyed it so much. And I actually read it and listened to it. The other one is the book Life by Keith Richards, who needs no introduction whatsoever. The audiobook is read by Johnny Depp, who also needs no introduction. Johnny Depp, without impersonating Keith, as he might have done in the Pirates films, again, the gestalt, the feeling in his reading of Keith's very honest book is quite remarkable, and I recommend both of these books. We both recommend them. They're not about trance music as such, but they put you in a trance because they take you to that era, that time. When Dylan talks about stealing books from Dave Van Ronk, and Keith talks about Chuck Berry, and there's a marvelous anecdote in there when he often argued with Chuck Berry, even though he adored him, and he was arguing about who wrote a particular song, and Chuck insisted he wrote it, and Keith said, no, it sounds like a piano set of chord sequences, and found out that Chuck's piano player, who's called, I think, Jimmy Johnson, was that his name? I'm not going to just check on that if you're listening. Yeah. That it was obviously written by a piano player, and Keith found that out. Keith is a very, incidentally, talking about audible.com, Keith Richards is one of America's leading bibliophiles.
Really?
And recently gave a lecture at the very daunting New York Public Library, one of the most amazing buildings in the world, and gave a lecture about collecting rare books. Which
Keith can give a lecture.
He did, and apparently
he can speak.
He can speak, and he spoke about. I wasn't lucky enough to go, but I read about it in the Times, and it said that the talk was incredibly informative. He knows a lot about books. The thing about something just struck me: transformative trance. Trance is the first syllable of transformative, and I think that what I want to say here, we're talking about Keith Richards and Bob Dylan. That seems a long way away from Ali Akbar Khan and music from Madagascar. But I have to say that for me, the Beatles and the Stones and the Dead and Zeppelin and the Velvets and all of that, despite the fact that much of the music was no more than just different pop music. After all, the Beatles took their three-part harmonies from the Shirelles and from African-American music from Detroit, usually. They took it from there, and they were singing about, I want to hold your hand. That's not exactly trance music. But there was something there, something magic, which put us all in a kind of trance.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it started for me and for many people. Some people who I think one would find very surprising would say the same thing. For those of us that were young in the 60s, and now are in our 60s, that music did more for us in blowing our mind.
Right.
Then, later, I mean, I wasn't a huge Dead fan. I had to be dragged to a Dead concert because I was English, and I liked foppish English bands like, Moody Blues and Procol Harum and the Kinks. I didn't want to see the Dead at all. Eventually, in 1970, I went to the Goddard Music Conference, and it was called the Goddard Media Conference. But the Dead played, and I couldn't believe the experience that we were having together. That the audience and the band were truly one. There was no proscenium arch.
Yeah.
There was no them and us. It was the Grateful Dead and all of you. And I got it. I never bought a Grateful Dead record. I didn't particularly like their records, but I went to many of their concerts. And they could be terrible, depending on what they were taking, or how tired they were. But they could be transcendent. Yeah. And they definitely...
Jerry. It's all about Jerry.
Amazing, astonishing guitar player. But I know that I learned a little bit about music, using music as a trance tool, during those Dead concerts. I definitely did.
Well, I think we have an essential example of what trance music is. And this music, we're going to play a cut now, or part of one, comes from North Africa. And the two artists that are, it was called Asaruf, and Steve Sheehan, a very well-known percussionist, actually an American who lives in France, and Bali Otmani. I had to turn around and read that because it's not easy. But he comes from a Tuareg tribe. And actually all of the oral tradition or the musical tradition of his tribe was actually passed through women, which is very unusual. And there was in his family no women, children. So he was given the torch was passed to Bali, and he did this record. So their tradition is so much; it's nothing but a spiritual trance tradition. And talking about an ally, I mean, this we've talked very loosely in terms of many of these musicians from all of these different worlds, and how that is the common denominator, putting you into that particular state. This is transparently that. So here's a little of Steve Sheehan and Bali Othmani. So this is but a small example of what we're talking about when we're talking about transformational music as an ally to becoming more present and transcending some of life's day-to-day drudgeries, shall we say. So I think that, again, we should put a bunch of this music up on the site, and for people to be able to access. And I think a lot of this is can be new to people, and some of it can be a little difficult because you've got different chord structures, and especially with Indian music, quarter notes and, stuff that can be a little bit atonal to people. But once you start to just expose yourself to it, like we did in those days, we found the route through to really absorbing what this music has to offer. And both you and I were deeply involved with this, but we were as deeply involved with pop music, with rock and roll, with whatever came along that proved to have that experiential quality. So I think hopefully people, whoever's listening out there, please have an open mind to this. I think it can be very constructive to broaden horizons, and also when we talk about what Mindrolling is, one of the things that it is for us and why we're doing this podcast is to really talk about the cross-section of culture and consciousness. And certainly there isn't anything as powerful as music. I mean, certainly. Can you think of anything? I mean...
No, really, because when you're reading a book, for instance, it can grip you and it can grab you. Whether it puts you in a trance or not is debatable, because the actual business of taking in words is a left brain. It's a left brain process, and we're talking about a right brain phenomenon here. Now, I would say, I travel on the New York subway a lot, and it is just amazing how many people are on the subway every day with listening to music. And you don't know what they're listening to. They could be listening to Adele or Common or Nas or Green Day, whatever. But one thing I do know is that it isn't just escape. Because when you look at people on the subway, you see people who have put themselves in some kind of trance. Because it's hard. Life is hard for everyone. And it's particularly hard for, if you were driving a van from Brooklyn into Manhattan delivering sides of beef, and it's 95 degrees and 100% humidity, and that's what you do, and you get on the subway going home, that music can elevate and take the strain away. And it's essentially the same process. What Raghu and KD did with Triloka, and I had some involvement, obviously, it was taking it sort of to another level and saying, well, this is all around the world, and you don't necessarily have to listen to any words. It's just, it's a sound that gets to your heart, and somehow it's not a question of relief always. It's not always relief. Sometimes it's just, it takes you to another plane.
Mm-hmm. And just as importantly with what's going on in the world today, how this exposing oneself to music from these different parts of the world certainly has an impact on people being a little bit more friendly, a little bit more compassionate with different points of view, with different cultures and so on. I think that's pretty important too, and I'm glad we took part in that, and we can keep that moving forward. I think is an important thing. So, we could go on and on with this particular subject, but I think we're going to close out here. And we want to remind people, please do go to mindrollingpodcast.com, and we'd love to have all your support. This is all listener supported, so click on the areas in which you can support us. and do take a look at the audible.com offering and so on. And we'll say goodbye, Dave.
Yes, au revoir, until the next time, which I hope is soon.